So it seems like every single year that I go ahead and basically review some of these older products, the iPhone 6s is always on top of the list, and I think by far the iPhone 6s was one of the most impactful iPhones of all time. I don't think it was the best iPhone ever, but I think this iPhone brought a lot of stuff to the table that a lot of people kind of take for granted and kind of look over the iPhone 6s for. And I'll definitely tell you that if you're in the market for a brand new phone or even a used iPhone, this is a terrible option. I would not recommend buying this iPhone anymore. If you're still using it, maybe you can get like another couple months out of it or maybe a year. But if you're actively trying to buy a brand new iPhone, I would highly recommend avoiding this one. This thing was outdated pretty much like 2 years ago, and even 2 years ago it was pretty much outdated as well. So if you want to buy some iPhones that I would recommend buying this year though, however, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there and you can help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the outside of the iPhone 6s, this phone came out in 2015, so it's approaching 9 years old this year, which is insane. The fact that this iPhone is this old is pretty crazy to me. On the front, it has a 4.7-inch IPS LCD panel on the front, and it's a pretty basic panel. This thing is 500 nits of brightness, which really isn't that high. You're getting the top bezel, the bottom bezel on this thing. You're getting the Touch ID sensor, which this iPhone did actually bring Touch ID 2, which was a very cool feature. And within the display, it did bring Force Touch. That was another really cool feature that this iPhone actually brought that the other iPhones since then have basically used and kind of, used for the most part. But they took it away, but this iPhone did debut with that feature, which is a very, very cool thing. Now, at the bottom, you were getting a headphone jack and the Lightning port. This was the last iPhone ever to bring that headphone jack. So that's kind of crazy that this iPhone, did have that type of capability. The fact that it already brought so much stuff to the table, and we're pretty much just getting started. On the back side, you can see that we pretty much have the standard, aluminum back. It really wasn't that great of a back, but it is what it is. There's not much we can do about it now. You had the Apple logo, no wireless charging, and no IP certification. There was a little bit of water resistant sealing around this device, but there was no actual IP certification. This was, I think, the last iPhone to ever not have that, if you technically, count mainline builds, if you don't count the iPhone SE1. So it's pretty insane that this particular iPhone didn't really have water resistance when that's the most basic feature of most devices now. On top of that, on the top left corner, you're getting your camera setup, and overall, I will tell you on the outside, it looks pretty much as weird as it is kind of holding up nowadays. That's why I'm kind of sad about the iPhone SE3, why that Apple's still selling at that body. But there's a way to look at it, the iPhone 6s still kind of looks like a brand new iPhone if you consider the iPhone SE3, but it's a pretty outdated device, and I will tell you, for everything that it brought to the table, it is a fairly outdated phone that I would not recommend using anymore. Now, in terms of the camera setup, this is actually kind of an interesting thing. The iPhone 6s brought one of the first big jumps of the camera setups that we've had pretty much since the original iPhone, or maybe even since the iPhone 5. This iPhone had a 12 megapixel standard camera on the back and a 5 megapixel standard camera on the front. Now, what's so big about this type of camera? Well, it was the first time that we ever got a 12 megapixel sensor, so that in and of itself was a very, very big thing. Since then, mostly all iPhone cameras were 12 megapixels until the iPhone 14 or 15, so that was a pretty big thing that changed there. This was also the first iPhone to bring 4K at 30 on the back, so that was another pretty big advantage for this type of camera. Now, you are missing out on so many features that basic phones have nowadays, things like multiple sensors. You're only getting one small sensor on this thing. Most phones nowadays have multiple camera sensors, which is a pretty big deal, but also you're not getting anything like 4K at 60 on the front or the back. You're not even getting 1080p on the front of this phone. You're also not getting things like, portrait mode or cinematic mode or any of these other cool features that we have nowadays. It's a pretty basic camera, and that's exactly what you're paying for. So this is another pretty big area where if you're buying this phone in this day and age, you're definitely going to notice that you have a fairly outdated phone, and that's why I would that's another reason why I wouldn't really recommend buying this phone, is because it's already an outdated device from a hardware perspective, but especially from a camera perspective as well. Phones like the iPhone 7 Plus did actually bring a pretty big increase in jump in terms of the actual, build of the phone, so that might be something to consider, but this one pretty much no in my opinion. Now, in terms of software and longevity, this is a pretty insane thing too. What's funny is that the iPhone 6s kind of got discontinued with software in 2021. However, this phone has since gotten several software updates for the most part within iOS 15. So even since 2021, it's gotten iOS 15.7 and 15.7.3. I don't really remember what number we're at. Maybe we're at 15.8 now. This phone has gotten a lot of software updates just from, its mainline builds, which is actually pretty insane. However, it's missed out on all the features we got in iOS 16, and it's missed out on all the features that we got in iOS 17, and it's going to miss out on all the features that we're going to be getting on future iOS updates as well. The only thing you're really getting with this version of software is basically, iOS 15 security updates, and that's essentially all you're getting. I think what it is, for what it was at the time, it was great, but now it is kind of showing its age. And although iOS 15 was the last version of software, and you may be saying, oh, it's only like 2 years old, the other thing to think about is that this phone didn't really get all the features within iOS 15 either. So it was already an old phone when that phone, got that software. But another big thing is, I will give the iPhone 6s some credit. The jump between the iPhone 6 and the 6s was a very, very large jump, because the iPhone 6 stopped getting software support on iOS 12. The iPhone 6s kept getting software support until iOS 15. That's like a 3-year difference, and that was actually insane. And I felt kind of bad for iPhone 6 owners at the time. But the 6s, it is what it is. I think it's an outdated phone, but you can make the argument that it's still kind of getting software updates, so it's still kind of worth it. But I wouldn't really even go as far to say that. In terms of performance, this phone has that Apple A9 chip inside of it, with 2 gigabytes of RAM. Now, this was actually another big thing. This was the first iPhone to bring 2 gigs of RAM. And there were still iPhones being sold with 2 gigs of RAM, I think until the iPhone 8s were being sold. So with the iPhone 6s, 7, and 8, for 3 different versions of, years, the baseline iPhones had 2 gigs of RAM, and even the iPhone SE1 had 2 gigabytes of RAM as well. So this was the first iPhone to bring it. It essentially doubled the amount of power, essentially from one iPhone to the other, at least from the RAM perspective. And that in and of itself, again, was a pretty big deal for me. I remember when I was getting my iPhone 6 Plus back in like 2017 or 2016, it was in 2016, and I was like, there's no reason to go up to the 6S Plus. They look exactly the same. But internally, there were lots of changes, and even externally, there were some changes here and there, and that was a pretty big deal. You have to remember too that from a performance side, this iPhone, was a pretty good performing iPhone at that moment. And I remember for years after this iPhone came out, and when I bought it like in 2017, and I compared it against all the other phones after, I was kind of shocked how good of a job this phone was doing against all the other, successors and predecessors. So I think this iPhone held up fairly well for a while. It wasn't until like the battery shutdown program and all that stuff came out. But I do think, I give the iPhone 6s a lot of credit for being a fairly powerful phone at that moment. Another thing, this iPhone did bring that capability of being a little bit stronger and a little bit more durable than the iPhone 6. The 6 and 6 Plus were able to bend super, super easily. These iPhones, on the other hand, not so much. So I think that was like another big thing going on for this particular phone. And I actually did like having a phone that was a little bit more durable as well. Finally, the battery. This is probably the worst aspect of this phone. 1,715 milliamp hour battery. But on top of that, it had all of these random battery shutdowns and weird things that were going around or all over the place. So that's kind of a big disadvantage of this phone, the fact that it had that battery shutdown thing that happened, the battery health, being associated with the performance and Apple not selling us. So I do think overall the iPhone 6s legacy is kind of stained in a way because of that, but I do think that this phone brought so much stuff to the table that I do think, from a collector's item perspective, it's still probably kind of worth it, but I probably wouldn't recommend buying this phone anymore just because it's so severely outdated. You would be much better off buying a phone like an iPhone XR or an iPhone 11. Those things that are still supported with software, those make a lot more sense for me to recommend to people than this particular phone. So that pretty much covers it up here. If you have any other thoughts or questions, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.